be pricing in more information come 2:30.
All right, David, look, appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, James.
Rising commodity prices, particularly oil, and an increased awareness of environmental issues is driving a change towards electric-powered vehicles around the globe. Eday Life is a company that aims to be the first in Australia to import and distribute battery-powered electric vehicles from China into the Australian market. For more on its progress, we're joined in the studio by Managing Director at Eday Life, Mr. Robert Lane. Mr. Lane, thanks very much for your time this afternoon. I suppose just to start with, how much of a market do you think there is in Australia for electric cars?
It's in its infancy right now, but there's predictions that it could be 20% of the market by 2020. So we seem to be at the start of a movement towards it. Where it ends up, we're not sure. But there's some very big factories around the world that will agree with those numbers. Traditionally,
I suppose, when you look at the Australian automotive sector, there's been a lot of interest on, big V8s and, big family cars and sports cars. Is there a changing culture and a changing attitude, do you think, taking place?
Well, yes, the cost of running those vehicles, let alone the emissions, then the resale of those vehicles has been deplorable because of the cost of running them. People don't want to feel like they're soiling the earth anymore. They want to make a change, and that's certainly discussed at all levels of society and government, of course.
You say there's a push to potential size around 20% of the market here in Australia. What sort of a dollar amount does that represent?
Oh, dollar amount, I'm not sure. It's about 200,000 vehicles. So, in terms of billions of dollars, I couldn't tell off the top of my head.
I suppose, in terms of electric cars, one of the major concerns, I suppose, has been performance. When you look at how far it can go and then how long it takes to recharge. What are the details in terms of that with your vehicles?
Well, under conventional driving conditions, and that's just not thrashing the car but driving it normally, the target is 150 to 160 kilometres per charge at around about the speed limit. So most cars on a daily use are 64 kilometres a day. This is the average. They use 64 kilometres a day and they're idle 22 hours a day. So in that context, there's plenty of room in terms of distance, capability and recharging time.
And so how long would it take to recharge a flat battery to fully charge?
It's several hours, depending on the number of batteries and the capacity. But if you have a faster charge, it could be less.
Just obviously the Australian International Motor Show is going on at the moment, and there seems to be this real trend towards greener cars, greener technology and so forth. It appears to be a very competitive space, if nothing else.
Well, not that I saw it this morning. There was two cars there. There's a Mitsubishi Omni-Ev and the Leaf. It's a fairly token effort in terms of what's at the motor show. The Beijing show I was at 2 months ago, they had about a dozen with another several on the go. I mean, we're in a really behind in Australia at the moment with what the world's doing, particularly what China's doing.
But I suppose there are alternatives when people look, maybe have a carbon conscious or a price awareness. The answer isn't just electric cars. You'd be competing also with hybrids. The Prius, for example, one of the top-selling cars globally.
Yes, that's true. And I guess the complexity with the hybrids is you've got two engines. So you've got two sources of power. So there's a cost impost with that, as well as well, it's just a high-priced vehicle.
And in terms of price, a lot of the time, obviously, it's going to be a major factor. What sort of a price will you be putting on the car?
Well, depending on how many doors and how big it is, but we'll try to be as competitive as we can with a similar vehicle. In fact, there's a vision that we have that if we can bring in the one Chinese vehicle in an LPG, a petrol car, and a battery car, they could all be the same price, but you lease the battery. This is an option. So you actually lease and commit to the fuel source for the EV when you actually pay for the fuel for the LPG or the petrol at the pump. So it's a different way of thinking about the same result.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because just reading through some of the release, this adopting a lease approach whereby you'll manage the whole life of the vehicle. Just explain that approach, because it seems a very different one.
It is, and it's not locked in cement because the customer always tells you that where you go wrong. But the idea with Eday is being environmental and taking responsibility for the whole of life of the vehicle. So the idea with that is that we want to put it to the market and test this, but we think that there's an argument for a 2-year rental contract, a lease rental contract, at which point the vehicle would come back to us as we own it. We would refurbish it and put it out again at a slightly lower cost, but refurbish it with the latest technology, which may be a faster battery, it may be a different software controller. I'm sure the motor will be fine because they're pretty simple things. So to really refurbish and update, and we would do that 2 or 3 or 4 times depending on what the shape the vehicle is in. At the end of that time, then we could dispose of the car in an environmentally sensitive way, rather than just creating more landfill, if you like. So it's part of the philosophy of Eday to be more responsible longer term.
That's a very interesting approach. Anyway, Mr. Land, look, thanks very much for coming today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, James.
Now, the Coalition is demanding Treasurer Wayne Swan pull out all